She was only 6 small, hollow-cheeked, trembling against the glass pane as her frostbitten fingers smeared tiny prints across the window. Hunger gnawed her belly, fear made her breath short, and still she waited for a kindness that never came. Inside that dim house, the woman who should have been her shield fed, her only sharp words and colder silence. The plate stayed empty, the hope stayed hollow, but fate, ruthless and tender in equal measure, sent a weary patrol officer and his steadfast German shepherd down that very street. What they would uncover that night wasn't just a child in danger, it was the thread of a lie carefully woven in forged papers, one that, if left untouched, would have erased the girl's name, her past, and her future. Snow drifted heavy across Maple Ridge, Colorado, a town where winter muffled everything except the cries you weren't meant to ignore. Officer Jack Carter guided his SUV carefully along Aspen Street, headlights carving tunnels through the storm. The hum of the engine nearly drowned it out, but then, there it was, a knock, faint, irregular, a sound fragile enough to disappear into the snow, but stubborn enough to reach his bones. Beside him, Bruno stirred first. 6 years of loyalty had sharpened the shepherd's instincts sharper than steel. His ears flicked, body stiffened, a low growl building like distant thunder. Jack didn't need words. He knew. Someone was out there. Jack's jaw tightened. 38 years had carved him strong, but grief had carved him deeper. Years ago, he'd arrived too late on a welfare call, a boy gone silent forever. He'd carried that weight like a shadow since. That memory was why he heard what others missed, why he never ignored the faintest cry. And tonight, that echo had returned. He slowed, pulling beside a sagging duplex with a weak porch light fighting the storm. Frost clung to its siding, curtains crooked like broken teeth, snow choking the steps. And then the sound again. A knock, uneven, desperate. "Let's check it, partner," Jack muttered. Bruno slipped from the SUV, paws sinking into the snow with silent grace. He lowered his nose, sniffing deep, then froze. His body tensed, ears sharp as arrows. Hunger, blood, fear. Jack knew the signals. They moved up the porch together, the wood groaning beneath their weight. Jack rapped his knuckles hard against the door. "Maple Ridge Police!" For a heartbeat, only silence answered. Then, a small hand bare, trembling, pushed open the curtain just an inch. Eyes stared out, wide, wet, and pleading. Jack felt his chest clamp tight. A child. Alone. And then, from deep inside the house, a voice cut through the air, low, sharp, commanding. Too quick, too practiced. "She's fine. Go away." But Bruno's growl deepened, fur bristling. His instinct screamed what Jack already felt. This was no simple welfare check. Behind that thin door was not just a hungry child, there was danger, and something much darker was waiting to be exposed. "Is everything all right in there?" A pause, then a child's muffled sob. Jack's jaw clenched. Bruno pressed forward, sniffing at the doorframe, body taut but not aggressive. From inside came a harsh female voice, sharp as glass. "I told you to clean it up. Stop crying and fix it." Jack glanced at Bruno. The dog's hackles rose faintly. Not a threat, but an alarm. "Ma'am," Jack called. "Open the door, please." The lock scraped reluctantly, and the door cracked open to reveal Vanessa Hale. She was in her mid-30s, tall and angular, with pale skin that seemed stretched thin across her cheekbones. Her honey blonde hair was pinned back in a clip, every strand in place, her lipstick a little too perfect for midnight. She carried herself with a stiff confidence, though her eyes flickered with something darker, annoyance, perhaps fear. "Officer," she said smoothly, "is there a problem?" "We heard a distress knock," Jack replied. "Mind if we step inside?" Vanessa gave a tight smile, then pulled the door wider. "We're fine. A little. Lesson about responsibility, that's all." Inside, the room smelled of bleach, layered over stale grease. The furniture was old, but arranged as if for show. On the wall hung a temporary guardianship agreement framed in cheap gold. On the carpet, a child knelt, small body, hunched, scrubbing its spilled water with a towel. Jack's eyes softened as they landed on her. Lily Parker, 6 years old, looked impossibly small. Her hair was pale blonde, tangled around her face. Her pajamas hung loose, exposing the fragile angles of her arms. Leaning against the wall nearby were pink crutches decorated with butterfly stickers peeling at the edges from long use. Her cheeks were flushed, eyes red from crying. Vanessa gestured at the girl. "See, she's learning not to. Be careless." Jack stepped closer, his tone calm but edged with steel. What's your name, sweetheart? Lee, the girl whispered, voice breaking. I spilled my water. My crutches slipped. Bruno moved then, slowly, deliberately, pressing his warm flank against her. He lowered his head until his nose brushed her knee, then gave a gentle nudge. Lily's hand trembled as she reached out, but when her fingers touched his fur, she held on like she'd found the steady thing in the room. Jack crouched to Lily's level. Are you hurt anywhere? She hesitated, then nodded. Slightly. My ribs and my arm. Jack's trained eyes caught it. Faint red marks. Around her wrist, the shape of adult fingers. His stomach turned. Vanessa's voice cut in sharply. She exaggerates. Children with disabilities need firm guidance. I'm the only one making sure she learns. Jack stood slowly, towering. Over her. EMS will be called to evaluate her. That's non-negotiable. Her jaw tightened. She doesn't need, it's not optional, Em. Hale, Jack radioed. In for medical support. Voice steady, while his eyes scanned the room. He noted the pantry door with a padlock, hanging open. The stack of mail on a side table, utility shut off, notices addressed to Vanessa, and one unopened envelope addressed to Lily, sealed with a butterfly sticker. On the wall, the guardianship document bore a faded notary stamp, the dates inconsistent by nearly 2 weeks. He turned back. Lily, we're going to take you someplace safe and warm. All right, Bruno and I will be with you. Lily's blue eyes flicked too. All him, searching, then back to Bruno. The dog gave a small chuff as if answering. Lily nodded. Vanessa's voice dripped honey but couldn't hide its tremor. You have no right to remove her. State law allows emergency protective custody when there's suspicion of harm, Jack said firmly. You may follow us to the hospital. He reached for Lily's jacket hanging by the door. Vanessa snatched it, shoving it toward the girl. Here, proof I take care of her. Jack ignored the show. He helped Lily to her feet, guiding her arms through the sleeves. Bruno pressed close, steadying her as she leaned on her crutches. The dog's presence was like a wall of warmth between the child and the woman, glaring in the doorway. Outside, the wind cut, sharp, but the patrol SUV glowed with heat. Jack wrapped Lily in a fleece blanket from his kit, tucking it around her knees. Bruno jumped in beside her, resting his chin heavily on her lap. Lily gave a small, tired smile at the weight, whispering, "Good heavy, Jack." Closed the door and returned to the porch briefly. Vanessa stood framed in the yellow light, arms crossed, expression carved from ice. "This isn't over," she muttered. "Dally, Jack." Didn't answer. He turned back to the SUV. Inside, Lily had already leaned against Bruno, eyes fluttering shut. Jack started the engine, radioed the medics, and pulled away from the duplex. Snow swallowed the street behind them, covering the footprints, the doorway, the bitter voice. Ahead, lights from the hospital glowed faintly through the storm. For tonight, the child was safe. Tomorrow would bring questions about guardianship papers, about odd receipts, about the smudged name of a county clerk. But tonight ended with warmth, food, and the steady comfort of a German shepherd's head resting on a little girl's lap. The siren's wail cut softly through the blizzard as the ambulance rolled into the Elk County Medical Center, its lights painting streaks of red and blue across the whitewashed night. Behind it followed Officer Jack Carter's patrol SUV. In the back seat, under a fleece blanket, Lily Parker lay curled against the bulk of Bruno, the German shepherd, steady breathing her only lullaby. The hospital doors slid open with a sigh, warm light spilling across tile floors, scrubbed to a shine. Doctor. Maya Collins was waiting just inside, summoned by dispatch. She was in her early 40s, with dark chestnut hair, pulled into a loose bun, a streak of silver glinting at her temple. Her hazel eyes carried both sharp intelligence and a patience earned from years in pediatrics. She was not tall, but carried herself upright with the presence of someone who had seen too many small bodies hurt by big people. Her lab coat was pressed but softened by time, pockets stuffed with pens, stickers, and a stethoscope that clicked against a laminated ID. "Bring her in." "Here," Dr. Collins said, guiding the paramedics toward an exam room painted in pale yellow. Her voice was firm, but her hand on Lily's shoulder was feather light. Jack walked beside the gurney, Bruno pacing at his heel. The dog drew a great few stares from nurses unused to police canines and pediatric wards, but one look at Lily's small hand gripping Bruno's fur, and no one objected. Inside the room, Lily sat propped against pillows, hair limp over her shoulders, skin too pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "Doctor." Collins crouched to her eye level, setting her stethoscope aside. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm Dr. Maya. May I check you over, just to make sure we fix all the hurts?" Lily glanced at Jack, then at Bruno, who gave a short huff as if to say it was safe. The girl nodded. The exam was gentle but thorough. Dr. Collins lifted Lily's sleeves and found fading bruises along her arms, some days old, some fresh. Her ribs showed slight swelling where she admitted to falling. Her skin bore the sallow tint of prolonged malnutrition. The hollows under her eyes deepened by restless nights. "She's underweight by at least 15% for her age, doctor," Collins murmured, making notes on a clipboard. "Bruises are inconsistent with ordinary play and the marks on her wrists." She glanced at Jack, her brows knitting. Lily spoke in halting whispers. "She locked me in the pantry sometimes, said it was for my own good. I was so hungry." Her voice cracked, but Bruno shifted closer, placing his chin on the bed. Lily's hand, small and trembling, slid along his ear, stroking the fur until her breath steadied. "Doctor?" Collins exhaled slowly, forcing her expression into calm. Reassurance. "You're safe now. No more locks, no more empty plates. Tonight, you eat, and tomorrow you'll feel stronger." An orderly brought in a tray, warm soup, bread, and apple slices. Lily stared at it as if unsure she was allowed. Only after Jack nodded did she begin to eat. Slowly at first, then with the urgency of a child who has waited too long. Bruno sat close, patient, his amber eyes soft as he watched her reclaim something. Simple fullness. While Lily ate, Jack stepped into the hall to place a call. His voice was low, edged with controlled anger. "Detective Ramirez, it's Carter. I've got a 6-year-old possible. Long-term neglect. Suspicious guardianship paperwork. I need you to look at the documents." Detective Owen. Ramirez was the kind of man who remembered every lie ever told in his presence. At 42, he had a thick build, the kind that made his suit strain at the shoulders and a salt and pepper beard trimmed close to his jaw. His brown eyes carried the weight of 20 years in investigations, the last 10 inches fraud and forgery. A childhood in a poor Denver neighborhood, where his parents had been conned out of their home by fake paperwork, had made him a blood hound for deception. When Jack called, Ramirez's reply was immediate. "Fax me the copy. I'll tear it apart line by line." Back inside the room, Dr. Collins had finished documenting her findings. Lily, sated at last, leaned drowsy against the pillows. Bruno had climbed, with deliberate slowness, onto the chair beside her bed, resting his head across her lap. The girl's hand remained buried in his fur as her eyelids sank. "She trusts him," Dr. Collins murmured. "That's rare considering," Jack nodded. "Bruno's earned it. He knows when someone needs him more than the badge does." The room grew quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and Lily's even breaths. For the first time that night, she looked at peace. Hours later, as Jack prepared to leave, he gathered Lily's small backpack from where the medics had dropped it. It was faded. Pink, straps fraying, stuffed with odds and ends, a torn notebook, a dull pencil, and a battered teddy bear with one eye missing. Bruno sniffed the bag automatically, but then his nose froze on the teddy. He pressed harder, tail flicking once. Jack frowned. "What is it, boy?" Bruno nosed at the bear again, then pawed gently until Jack unzipped the seam. Inside, wrapped in layers of tape, was a small metal key. Its surface, scuffed but intact. Jack held it up. "Lily, do you know what this is?" The girl stirred from half-leap, blinking. "Mama gave it to me," she said. "Keep it safe. Keep it secret." She hid it in Teddy so no one could take it. Her voice was soft, dreamlike. "She told me one day I'd need it." Jack's gaze hardened, but his voice stayed gentle. "Do you know what it opens?" Lily shook her head, nestling back against Bruno. "Just that it's important," she said. "Only someone kind would help me figure it out." The key felt heavy in Jack's palm, heavier than its metal. He slipped it into an evidence bag, mind already racing. Guardianship papers with mismatched dates, a woman quick with bleach and cruel with words, and now a hidden key, secreted away by a dying mother who had feared what might come for her daughter. Jack looked at Bruno, whose eyes met his, with the quiet certainty only a seasoned partner could hold. Whatever that key unlocked, it was the next step. 4. Tonight, though, Lily slept safe, her stomach full for the first time in who knew how long. her hand resting in the thick fur of the dog who had promised her a new pack. The morning after the snowstorm, the town of Maple Ridge looked scrubbed raw. Roofs sagged under white blankets, tree branches dripped icicles, and the streets were silent, but for the hum of snowplows clearing paths. In the passenger seat of his patrol SUV, Officer Jack Carter held the small metal key Bruno had sniffed out from Lily's teddy bear. He turned it over in his gloved hand, watching the scuffed edges catch the light. 6-year-old Lily Parker sat bundled in the back seat, her pink backpack at her side, crutches leaning against the door. She still looked fragile, her cheeks pale against the oversized hoodie Jack had found for her. But there was a spark of curiosity in her blue eyes as she watched the key. Bruno lay stretched beside her, his large head resting near her knees, amber eyes half closed, yet always aware. "Do you know where it goes?" Jack asked. Lily shook her head. "Mama said it was for something important," she whispered. "It was my future box." Her small voice carried both pride and fear. Jack's jaw tightened. He had seen plenty of children burdened with secrets, but something about the way Lily clung to her teddy bear and her mother's last words made him vow silently not to fail her. By mid-morning, he had an answer. Detective Owen Ramirez called in the night before, had pulled a string or two. Over the phone, his voice was gravel deep, the kind of tone that carried both fatigue and iron resolve. "The key matches a safe deposit at First Mountain Bank," Ramirez said. "Boxes under the name Elena Parker." The name was a soft blow. Elena Parker, Lily's mother, was gone, lost 2 years earlier. Jack had never met her, but Lily spoke the name like a candle in the dark. Jack arranged for them to visit the bank. First Mountain Bank squatted on Main Street, its sandstone facade darkened by years of snow and soot. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and paper. The receptionist, a middle-aged man with thinning hair named Carl Benson, led them to the vault after Jack flashed his badge. "Been a while since this one was touched," Carl said. His suit was rumpled, and his spectacles perched precariously on the end of his nose, giving him the look of someone who had long ago given up on appearances, but not on kindness. "We don't usually open boxes without the owner, but a key and a police escort changes things." They followed Carl into the vault, where rows of steel drawers lined the walls like a giant filing cabinet for secrets. Carl located the number stamped on the key and slid the box out, placing it on a table in the small viewing room. Jack looked at Lily. "Do you want to open it?" Her fingers trembled, but she nodded. Bruno, sensing her nerves, nudged her elbow. With Jack's help, she fitted the key into the lock and turned. The latch clicked, a sound that seemed to echo, louder than it should. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. Jack unfolded it carefully. Out spilled 3 things: a stack of papers tied with ribbon, including a notarized will, a savings book with entries in Elena Parker's name, the balance modest but clearly earmarked for Lily's future, a handwritten letter. The ink slightly faded but still clear, addressed simply, "For my Lily and whoever stands guard for her." Lily leaned forward, eyes wide. Jack unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. "My dearest Lily," the letter began, the handwriting neat, steady, written with the care of someone who wanted her words to last. "If you are reading this, I am no longer there to keep you safe, but I prayed for a good soul to help you find what I leave behind." Jack's voice slowed as he scanned the lines. Elena described her illness, her worry for Lily, and her decision to arrange temporary guardianship. The will specified, clearly, custody of Lily was to fall to Elena's cousin, Margaret Allen, a school teacher in Oregon, with a reputation for gentleness and fairness. There was no mention of Vanessa Hale. Jack's brows furrowed as he reached the next paragraph. Elena's words darkened. "There is one I do not trust. Her name is Vanessa Hale. She came into my life pretending friendship, but her interest in Lily's trust fund unsettled me. I also discovered she has ties to a man named Howard Briggs, a clerk at the Elk County office. I believe they have conspired to alter documents in order to gain access to Lily's inheritance." Jack exhaled sharply. Howard Briggs, the name, tickled at the back of his mind. He remembered seeing it on the guardianship form in Vanessa's house. The letter continued, "A final plea. If Lily cannot be with Margaret, she must never be placed with Vanessa. Please protect her. Bruno, if you are still here, keep watch." Jack paused. The name leapt from the page like a hidden blessing. Elena had known Bruno, perhaps trusted him as much as any person. Bruno gave a soft chuff, as though recognizing his name in the air. Lily's eyes shone with tears, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. Mama knew Bruno. Jack folded the letter carefully, throat tight. He turned to the will again, noting the dates. Elena had signed it weeks before. Her death, witnessed by two neighbors whose names Jack recognized as long-standing Maple Ridge residents. Every line looked official, in stark contrast to the sloppy guardianship paper Vanessa had hung in her living room. Bruno sniffed at the box again, then pressed his nose against the envelope the letter had been tucked in. He sneezed, sat back, and whined low. Jack caught the meaning instantly. Bruno, and had smelled that scent before. Jack lifted the envelope closer. Beneath the paper and ink, a sharp undertone lingered. Antiseptic, the kind used to scrub surfaces, the kind Jack had smelled thick in Vanessa's house. You smell it too, don't you, boy? Jack murmured. Bruno's tail tapped once, then stilled. The recognition hit like a blow. The same chemical tang lingered on Vanessa's floors, her countertops, her very skin. It wasn't just her obsession with bleach to keep up appearances. It tied her directly to this envelope as though she had handled it, tampered with it, or tried to wipe away fingerprints. Jack slipped the documents back into the box, sealed them carefully, and signed the chain of custody form Carl Benson provided. He placed the letter in a separate evidence bag marked with Bruno's alert. As they stepped out of the bank into the cold morning, Lily held the savings book close as though it were treasure. Jack walked beside her, the key now resting heavier than ever in his pocket. The truth had begun to surface. Elena Parker had foreseen the danger. Vanessa Hale was not just cruel. She was conspiring. And Howard Briggs, the county employee whose signature Jack had seen on that forged guardianship paper, was part of it. Bruno glanced up at Jack, muzzle dusted with frost, eyes steady. He had found the first real scent of the truth, and it would be followed. For Lily, it was the first time her mother's voice had reached her across the years. For Jack, it was the first undeniable sign that the fight had only begun. The sun struggled weakly over Maple Ridge the next morning, pale light glinting off frozen branches. Officer Jack Carter leaned on the hood of his patrol SUV, the cold seeping through his gloves as he reread the receipts found in Elena Parker's safe deposit box. Most were ordinary groceries, prescriptions, but one stood out. A monthly bill from Red Willow Storage, a facility he knew sat on the outskirts of town near the creek that gave it its name. Jack's gut told him this wasn't coincidence. He wasn't alone in the feeling. Detective Owen Ramirez, bundled in his charcoal coat, gray scarf tight around his broad neck, scanned the paper with a scowl. The man's face was all hard planes and shadows, his beard peppered with silver, eyes dark from years of parsing lies. Vanessa doesn't strike me as someone who pays rent on a dusty storage unit for old furniture. Whatever's there, it's paper. Paper she can't risk keeping in her house. Jack glanced at Bruno. The shepherd stood alert beside them, black and tan fur, dusted with frost, tail low but steady. He was built like stone, chest broad, ears sharp. At 6, Bruno had matured into a guardian, his instincts sharpened by both training and the life behind him. Abandoned by a breeder, rescued by the department, then forged into Jack's partner. His patience with Lily had proven he was more than muscle. He was intuition and loyalty incarnate. "Let's see what he finds," Jack said quietly. By the time they reached Red Willow Storage, the day had warmed slightly, but the air around the creek smelled of damp iron and cedar. The facility was a spread of corrugated metal units, rows of doors painted red, the numbers stenkled in fading black. A chain-link fence circled the property, and inside a small office sat the manager. The manager was a wiry man in his 50s named Earl Jennings with sun-leathered skin, and a limp that made each step uneven. His flannel shirt smelled faintly of tobacco, and his eyes held the weary suspicion of someone who had seen too many people rent units for reasons they didn't want to explain. Jack flashed his badge. "We need access to Unit 17B, rented by Vanessa Hale." Earl scratched his jaw. "She pays in cash, always on time. Doesn't strike me as the type who stores Christmas decorations." He fumbled with a ring of keys and handed one over. "Better you than me." Door sticks inside. The unit was dim, the air stale with dust and damp. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers, some collapsing under their own weight. Old furniture leaned against the walls, but most space was taken by plastic tubs marked with masking tape. Bruno patted in first, nose low. He moved with practiced care, weaving through the clutter, then froze near a stack of boxes at the back. His ears prick-ricked, tail stiffened, and he pawed at one marked receipts. 2019. Good boy, Jack murmured, tugging the box forward. Inside lay not ordinary receipts, but papers thick with mildew. Ramirez pulled on gloves and began sorting. The first document stopped them both cold. A photocopy of Ella Lenena, Parker's will, only altered. Where the original named Margaret Allen as guardian, this one had Vanessa's name, written in. The font slightly different, alignment skewed. The notary stamp was blurred, almost laughably so, but for someone not looking closely, it might have passed. Next came pre-filled transfer forms, naming Vanessa Hale as recipient of Lily's trust fund. Her signature was missing, as if waiting for the right moment. Ramirez's scowl deepened. Classic forgery staging. They keep the forms warm until the paperwork looks legitimate. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a cloth, lay a cheap burner phone, its casing scratched, battery taped in place. Jack powered it up. A few files remained. Short recordings. The first clicked alive with static, then Vanessa's unmistakable voice. Howard. The notary stamp won't match. Fix it, a man answered, weary and nervous. I've already pulled too many favors. If someone checks, they won't, Vanessa snapped. By the time they look, the money will be gone. The second recording was worse. Howard again, low and hesitant. The child is thinner every week. People notice Vanessa's reply. Dripped contempt. Good makes the story believable. A poor, sickly child needing better care. Judges eat that up. Jack's fists tightened, the gloves creaking. He had heard cruelty before, but this deliberate hunger inflicted on a child gnawed at him like fire. Bruno gave a soft growl, sensing his partner's rage. Ramirez slid the phone into an evidence bag. This is enough to rattle them, but if we want conviction, we need Vanessa to spell it out herself. Jack nodded, slowly. Then we set the stage. We let her think she's won. They returned to the station that afternoon, the evidence logged and secured. Jack sat across the table from Ramirez in the briefing room. Bruno curled at his feet, the dog's presence grounding him. They spread the documents, photographs, and transcriptions across the table. She thinks she's clever, Ramirez said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed over his broad chest. We can use that. Get her talking, let her gloat, pride. It will sink her. Jack rubbed the bridge of his nose. If I tell her I'm willing to work something out, she'll lean in. She can't resist control. He looked at Bruno, then back to Ramirez. But I want a record that sticks. Audio, video, every word. Ramirez's eyes softened briefly. Beneath his hardened exterior, he was still the boy whose family had been conned out of their home. We'll do it by the book, the safest way for Lily and for you. Jack called his supervisor, who authorized a controlled sting. The plan was simple. Jack would pretend to waver to consider Vanessa's offer and invite her to talk terms. Bruno would accompany him, this time wearing a small chest-mounted camera tucked into his harness. The footage would provide both perspective and undeniable evidence. As evening fell, the team gathered in the operations room. Maps of Maple Ridge spread across the wall, marked with Vanessa's known haunts. Ramirez briefed the squad, 2 officers for surveillance, 1 to handle comms, medics on standby in case the meeting turned volatile. Bruno stood still as Jack fitted the camera into his vest, fastening the strap snug around his muscular chest. The shepherd shifted once, then looked up, eyes steady as if to say he understood. Jack ruffled the fur along his neck. You ready, partner? Tonight, you're not just my nose, you're my witness. Bruno huffed softly, leaning into Jack's hand. The sting was set. Tomorrow night, Vanessa Hale would believe she had lured Jack Carter into compromise. She would walk into the conversation certain of her power. And, when she spoke, when she bragged about the falsified will, the forged documents, the hunger she inflicted her, words would be captured forever. For Lily Parker, that meant hope. For Jack Carter and Bruno, it meant justice. Finally, moving into reach. The Hillside Cafe sat on the corner of Elm and Jefferson, not far from the Elk County courthouse. On weekdays, it was a place for lawyers to sip bitter coffee between hearings, for teachers to grade papers over bagels, for farmers to stop in before heading back to their fields. Its wooden sign creaked in the winter wind, and the aroma of roasted beans drifted onto the street, masking the sharper scent of salt from melting snow. Inside, the cafe was warm, with brick walls lined with photographs of old Maple Ridge, leather booze polished by years of use, and soft yellow lamps casting long shadows. That morning, a few locals lingered, bundled in flannel and denim, sipping slowly from ceramic mugs. None of them knew that the place had been carefully seated with plain clothes. Officers, each nursing coffee, but wearing the alert posture of hunters waiting for a signal, at a corner table. Near the back sat Jack Carter, his broad shoulders tense beneath his dark patrol jacket. His face, with its square jaw, and lines etched deep from years of midnight calls, was set in controlled neutrality. Across from him sat Lily. Parker, perched on a chair with her crutches, leaned carefully beside her. She wore a knitted beanie pulled low over her golden hair, and her thin hands clutched a cup of cocoa like it was a lifeline. Beside her, stretched along the booth, with quiet vigilance, was Bruno. The German shepherd's fur caught the lamplight, highlighting the black saddle pattern along his back, the tan mask of his muzzle. His eyes, amber and steady, never left the cafe entrance. The bell over the door jingled. Every officer in the room stiffened slightly, though to outsiders it was imperceptible. Vanessa Hale entered like she owned the ground beneath her. At 35, she was striking in a way that demanded attention. Her tall frame was wrapped in a tailored charcoal coat that flared at the waist. Blonde hair swept into glossy curls, lips painted in a red, too bold for a winter morning. She smiled as she spotted Jack, but her eyes, icy gray, never softened. They were eyes that measured value in people the way bankers measure currency. She approached the table, sliding into the booth across from Jack, with the ease of someone accustomed to getting her way. "Jack," she purred, smoothing the paper she carried onto the table. "You did the right thing calling me. For Lily's sake." Jack kept his expression tight, only arching a brow. "You said you had documents. Show me." Vanessa's painted nails tapped against the folder before she opened it, revealing transfer papers and a notarized copy of a will, the same forged version they had already recovered from Red Willow storage. She angled them toward him with a flourish. "All tidy. A judge will see this and sign off without hesitation. No one wants a sickly child caught in limbo. I've already prepared the guardianship confirmation. It's all here." Lily shrank against Bruno, who shifted slightly, pressing closer, his warm bulk acting as a living shield. His nose twitched, catching the chemical tang of Vanessa's perfume mixed with the antiseptic trace he had recognized before. Jack leaned forward, voice calm. "And what about the details? These things don't usually slide through so easily." Vanessa laughed, a sound that turned heads from 2 tables away. She lowered her voice, and again, leaning closer. "Howard has taken care of everything. Court clerks don't ask questions when the paperwork arrives. Already stamped. A little grease in the right gears and suddenly doors open. You'd be amazed at how easy it is." Jack tapped the edge of the paper, careful to let the wire beneath his collar pick up every word. "And, Lily, how do you think the court will see her condition?" Vanessa's lips curled. "Oh, Jack, you underestimate strategy. A few weeks of reduced meals, and she looks the part. Frail, needy. Judges sympathize with children who appear neglected. They think they're rescuing her when they sign her over. It's practically theater." Lily flinched, but Bruno pressed his head into her side, grounding her with a soft nudge. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing his hands to remain open on the table. Every fiber of him wanted to leap across the booth, but the plan demanded patience. Vanessa leaned back, are confident. "Once the transfer goes through, the trust fund is mine to manage. I'll make sure Lily gets what she needs, of course, but the paperwork will speak louder than any accusation. Even if Elena rose from the grave, she couldn't undo it." Jack gave a small nod, as though he were considering. Then, suddenly, he brushed his thumb against the rim of his cup. The signal. Across the cafe, Detective Ramirez stood. His frame filled the narrow aisle as he moved forward, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. Ramirez's voice was clear, deep, carrying the authority of years spent unraveling lies. "Vanessa Hale, you're under arrest for fraud, child, endangerment, and conspiracy." For the first time, Vanessa's poise faltered. Her eyes darted toward the exit, but Bruno was already moving. With a sudden surge of muscle, he leapt down from the booth and positioned himself squarely between her and the door at the rear of the cafe. His bark thundered through the men room, low and commanding, halting her mid-step. "Don't try it," Jack warned, standing to his full height. "It's over. Vanessa's smile flickered back, brittle and desperate. You fools have no idea what you're doing. Howard will bury you all in paperwork. You'll regret this. She reached for the folder on the table, but Ramirez's gloved hand landed firmly on hers, wrenching the papers free. The deputies guided her hands. Behind her back, the snap of handcuffs echoing louder than the cafe's soft jazz. Her protests grew shrill, accusing everyone from judges to ghosts. But the room no longer listened. Every word had already been captured. Every piece of evidence was now secured. Bruno remained by the rear door, body taut, eyes fixed on her until Ramirez gave the all clear. Only then did the shepherd return to Lily's side, earning a trembling but brave stroke across his fur. Jack exhaled slowly, the weight of days finally shifting. He knelt beside Lily, his voice quiet. It's done. She can't hurt you anymore. The girl nodded, tears brimming, but her gaze stayed steady on him. Mama said you'd find the truth. Jack swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We found it, thanks to you and Bruno. In the corner of the cafe, officers secured Vanessa's phone and documents, bagging each piece of evidence. The chatter of unsuspecting. Customers returned slowly, the buzz of gossip already starting. But for Jack, Ramirez, Bruno, and Lily, the sound meant only one thing: the first victory had been won. The Elk County Courthouse stood tall against the winter sky, its sandstone facade stray with age, columns, like sentinels guarding the entrance. Snow clung stubbornly to the steps as officers guided Howard Briggs inside. His arrest had followed Vanessa's, and now the time for answers had come. Howard Briggs was a man in his late 40s, thick around the waist, with thinning brown hair that clung to his scalp in greasy strands. His face was ruddy, the kind of red that spoke of years of the poor habits. Too much whiskey, too little sleep. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes shifted constantly, unable to meet anyone's gaze for long. He had once worked as a clerk in the Elk County Records Office, stamping papers, filing petitions, handling signatures. No one ever thought twice to check, but his soft hands, used to ink and paper, had been paid to commit crimes. Detective Owen Ramirez led the questioning. Ramirez's sharp features looked harsher, under the fluorescent light of the interrogation room, the gray in his beard catching each flicker. He had a habit of folding his arms across his broad chest when listening, an instinct born from years of interrogations, where silence often pried open mouths faster than threats. Jack Carter sat across the table too, his steady presence beside Bruno, who lay at his feet, eyes fixed on Howard with unblinking patience. Howard shifted, the metal chair creaking beneath him. I don't see why I'm here, he muttered, voice raspy. Ramirez slid a file across the table. Inside, photographs from Red Willow storage, the altered will, the transfer forms. Another sheet held stills from the burner phone recordings, timestamps and transcripts attached. That's why, Ramirez said. His tone was calm, almost conversational, but his eyes didn't waver. Howard's jaw worked, the muscle in his cheek twitching. I was pressured. Vanessa said it was just paperwork. She said the girl needed stability and she'd take care of her. Jack leaned forward, voice steady, but edged with steel. Starving a child isn't stability, neither is stealing her future. Howard flinched, his hands tightening around the edge of the table. I didn't touch the kid. That was all, Vanessa. My part was signatures, stamps. She paid me. Cash. Ramirez tapped the file again. Then, tell us everything, because right now we have enough to charge you with fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud a trust, fund, and aiding child abuse. You'll go down with her unless you start talking. Silence hung heavy. Bruno gave a low growl, not aggressive, but insistent, like a drumbeat of truth. Howard's gaze flicked to the shepherd, sweat forming at his temples. That dog, it's like he knows. Jack's hand rested on Bruno's neck. He does. He followed the trail. Straight to your work. Something in Howard cracked, shoulders slumping. He exhaled hard. Fine, I'll talk. For the next hour, Howard detailed everything. Vanessa had approached him months earlier, slipping into his office with manicured nails and promises of cash. She had wanted him to alter custody records, to forge a supplemental guardianship order, and to make sure her name appeared in places it never belonged. In return, he had received envelopes stuffed with bills enough to clear his gambling debts, enough to keep his silence. She said no one would notice. Howard admitted, rubbing his forehead. "The court clerks are overworked. The stamps blur anyway, and, if anyone asked, I could blame it on the copy machine." His voice grew smaller. "I didn't know she'd go that far with the kid." Jack's fist clenched beneath the table. "You knew enough." Howard's confession was signed, recorded, and sealed. Within hours, prosecutors filed formal charges against both Vanessa Hale and Howard Briggs. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged wills, falsified, guardianship documents, financial transfers, and the burner phone recordings. The county judge wasted no time, issuing an emergency protection order for Lily Parker. She would not be returned to Vanessa under any circumstance. Custody was to remain with the state until her rightful guardian could be located. News of the case spread quickly through Maple Ridge. Local reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as Ramirez briefed them. But it wasn't Ramirez's sharp words that made the evening headlines. It was the image of K9, Bruno, the German shepherd whose nose had unraveled the conspiracy. The Maple Ridge Chronicle ran the headline, K9, Bruno, the nose that cracked the case. Photographs showed Bruno standing proudly beside Jack, his vest fitted, with the small chest camera that had recorded Vanessa's incriminating words. Children waved at him on the courthouse steps, and Bruno responded with his steady calm, tail flicking once, amber, eyes warm. For Lily, the moment was both surreal and hopeful. She had sat in the courtroom gallery with a soft blanket around her shoulders, her small figure dwarfed by the wooden benches. But when she saw Bruno on the news later that night, she smiled for the first time in days. "He's famous," she whispered, stroking his ears. Mama would have loved that. Jack felt the weight of Elena Parker's will pressing at his conscience. The document had been clear. Custody of Lily belonged to her cousin, Margaret Allen, in Oregon. It was time to honor that. He picked up the phone in his office, the cord coiled like a snake, and dialed the number, listed in the file. After 2 rings, a woman answered, her voice warm but tinged with fatigue. "Hello, this is Margaret." Jack introduced himself, explaining who he was and why he was calling. He heard her breath catch on, the other end. Margaret Allen was a woman in her mid-30s, tall and willowy, with auburn hair tied in a practical bun and freckles dusting her fair skin. She had chosen a quiet life as a school teacher in Portland, Oregon, pouring her energy into lesson plans and school programs. Elena had been her closest cousin, almost like a sister. When Jack told her about Lily, Margaret's voice trembled. "I thought she was with someone safe. I didn't know. Vanessa had done this. Elena wanted me to care for her. I promised if anything happened." Jack softened. "The courts will finalize guardianship soon, but I wanted you to hear it first from me. Lily is safe now, and when the time comes, she'll need you." Margaret's voice steadied with conviction. "I'll be there. I'll bring her home." Jack hung up, staring out his office window at the snow drifting down. Bruno rested his head against his leg, and Jack scratched, behind his ears. "We did it, boy, but it's not over. Not until Lily's safe, with family." That evening, the courthouse buzzed with the hum of justice finally turning its wheels. Prosecutors announced formal indictments. Vanessa Hale, child abuse, fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted theft of a trust fund. Howard Briggs, forgery of public documents, conspiracy, and aiding child endangerment. For once, the community of Maple Ridge, often weary with scandals swept under the rug, felt a measure of relief. And in the center of it stood a little girl with butterfly stickers on her crutches, a weary officer with calloused hands, and a German shepherd whose nose had guided them through the maze of lies. The last days of winter in Maple Ridge were always marked by gray skies, bare trees, and the restless stirring of spring beneath the frost. For Jack Carter, it meant time was running short. Soon, Lily Parker would leave the town where her pain had begun, and travel west to Oregon, where her mother's cousin waited to give her a fresh start. Before that, there were places to visit, words to say, and farewells to make. That morning, Jack steered his SUV toward the Sunfield Community Garden, with Lily in the back seat and Bruno's head resting against her knees. The garden was a patch of land transformed by volunteers into rows of flowers and vegetables, a place where sunlight seemed to linger longer than anywhere else. Local families had planted sunflowers in memory of loved ones, each stalk rising tall as a symbol of resilience. For Lily's mother, Elena Parker, there was a row marked by a simple wooden sign, "In loving memory, Lily sat quietly, her small hands folded in her lap. At 6, her face was delicate, framed by hair the color of wheat, and her blue eyes carried both innocence and a wisdom a child should bear so young. Her crutches lay beside her, painted pink with faded butterfly stickers, symbols of both her struggle and her spirit. Jack parked, helped her out, and together they walked the garden path. Bruno padded faithfully at their side, tail sweeping lightly against Lily's hand when she stumbled. The shepherd's tan and black coat gleamed, his body strong and steady, a living anchor. At the sunflower row, Lily pulled a small wooden tag from her pocket. She had written in careful letters, "Conlon Man." Her voice trembled as she read it aloud in English. "I will grow up strong." She planted the tag into the soil beneath, the flowers, her thin fingers pushing firmly as if claiming a promise. Jack stood silently behind her, his broad frame still in the chill wind, the lines of his weathered face softened with pride. For a man whose life had been shaped by duty and loss, his marriage broken by years of patrol shifts, his faith tested by crime, this moment felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Your mom would be proud," he said quietly. Lily turned, pressing her cheek against Bruno's fur. "Brun makes me feel like she's still here, warm and safe." The shepherd responded with a soft huff, leaning into her touch. 2 days later, the courthouse in Elk County was filled to capacity. Reporters crowded the steps. Townsfolk crammed into the gallery. Everyone had come to hear the sentencing. Vanessa Hale stood before the judge in a sharp navy suit, but her polished appearance could not hide the cold fury in her gray eyes. Her once perfect hair seemed thinner, her posture stiff with resentment. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged wills, falsified guardianship, audio recordings. Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a tall woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled into a bun, and a presence that silenced even the boldest lawyers, read the charges loud. Vanessa was found guilty of child abuse, fraud, forgery of public documents, and conspiracy. Her voice was firm as she delivered the sentence: 15 years in state prison. Howard Briggs, pale and defeated in his ill-fitting suit, slouched beside his attorney. He had confessed, traded his testimony for leniency, but still the gavel fell hard. 7 years for aiding and abetting, his career and reputation shattered. The courtroom hushed when the judge allowed Lily to speak. With Jack by her side and Bruno lying at her feet like a guardian, she held a small piece of paper. Her voice wavered at first, then grew. Steady. "I want to say thank you," she read to Officer Jack and to Bruno. "They taught me that kindness has a smell. It's like a warm coat and clean dog fur that's been in the Sunday they showed me. That even when someone tries to make you feel small, you can still be strong." People in the gallery wiped tears. Ramirez, standing in the aisle, lowered his head in respect. After the trial, arrangements moved quickly. Margaret Allen, Elena's cousin, arrived from Oregon to Maple Ridge. She was 36, tall and slender, with auburn hair pinned simply, freckles dotting her fair skin. Her voice carried the softness of a teacher, yet in her green eyes glowed a quiet fire. She knelt when she first met Lily, opening her arms. "Your mama wanted me to take care of you," she whispered, holding the child close. "And I will." From a distance, Jack Carter stood with his hands on his hips, relief and ache tangled in his chest. Bruno nudged him, amber eyes steady, as if to remind him, "We did our part." The morning Lily left Maple Ridge. Snow fell light and restless. At the bus station, the hum of the engine mixed with the scent of coffee and diesel. Passengers shuffled forward, shoulders heavy with coats. Lily pressed herself into Jack's arms, her tiny frame clinging to him like she feared the wind might carry her away. "Will I see you again?" she asked, eyes wide, trembling between hope and fear. Jack crouched low, his calloused hand warm on her shoulder. "We'll visit, and Bruno, he'll always be out there, looking out for kids like you. That's a promise." She hugged Bruno's neck, whispering, "Don't forget me." The shepherd licked her cheek, tail sweeping slow, steady, like a heartbeat that promised safety. For a moment, she buried her face in his fur, drawing strength from that warmth. Then the bus door closed, and Lily's small hand pressed against the glass until the snowy road swallowed her from sight. Weeks later, life shifted. Jack and Ramirez launched Bruno's Safe Paws, teaching children how to recognize danger, how to ask for help, how to trust their own voices. Bruno became the heart of every session. His calm presence melted fear. His obedience and loyalty showed children what protection looked like. Laughter filled gymnasiums as tiny hands lined up to touch him, as if each child borrowed a piece of his strength. Jack thought of Lily often, her words about kindness being warmth and fur, now that truth was reaching others. One evening, Jack and Bruno walked Maple Ridge's quiet streets. Snow crunched beneath their boots and paws. They paused at Sunfield Garden, where Elena Parker's sunflowers still stood tall against the frost. In the soil, Lily's wooden tag remained, weathered but firm. "I will grow up strong." Jack touched it gently. "She's safe now," he murmured. "We did what we could." Bruno sat beside him, gaze lifted, amber eyes unblinking. But then the shepherd's ears pricked, a sound down the street, faint, familiar, the kind of sound you don't mistake once you've heard it before. A child's knock, soft and uneven, carried through the cold. Jack froze, his breath misted in the air. He exchanged a glance with Bruno. The dog's tail had gone still, muscles tense, body alert. It wasn't Lily this time, but it was another cry, another child, another secret waiting to be dragged into the light. Jack straightened, his shadow stretching long under the street lamp. He whispered, almost to himself, almost to God, "It never ends, does it?" And Bruno, steady as the earth, pressed close to his side, ready. Because miracles don't always arrive once they come again and again. Through the weary officer who refuses to stop listening, through the loyal dog who never stops protecting, through the small hands that keep hope alive in the dark. Sometimes angels walk among us on 2 legs, on 4. And sometimes the story isn't ending at all. It's only beginning.